Well, this morning I would like for you to think for just a moment about the biggest and most elaborate wedding that you have ever been a part of. Some of you, those are some of the weddings I've been doing in the past. Some of you can remember those past wedding parties. Probably wishing we went back to the prayer confession. But anyway, what was the reception like? Was it in a big banquet hall? Was there entertainment? Was there a band? How was the food? Did the party last well into the next morning? Now, wedding receptions in Jesus' day, they were unlike anything that we have ever experienced at a wedding or a reception. The ceremony usually took place late in the evening. Wednesday, if the bride was a virgin. Thursday, if the bride was a widow. Typically, the wedding ceremony itself, took place after a large feast rather than before the large feast. Usually the whole town turned out to celebrate, along with the bride and the groom's extended family from wherever they came from. After the feast and the wedding ceremony, there was this procession. The procession went to the home of the groom. So in a town like Cana, that would have been a festive parade with lots of music, lots of dancing, partying. The parade would end up at the home of the groom's family. Now, the groom's family would then host an open house. That open house would consist of food, drink, entertainment, and that open house went for, wait for it, at least a week. Told you you'd never seen anything like this one, right? By the time Jesus and his disciples arrived at this particular reception, the week-long party was in full swing. But shortly after Jesus showed up, a problem emerged that threatened the entire celebration. The groom's family was running low on wine. Now, running low on wine is a fairly manageable problem in 21st century Leland, North Carolina. We just run out to Harris Teeter, right? And if it was a problem here at if it's a Bridge wedding reception, we'd have no problem because all we'd have to do is go to Dennis and Terry Hines' house. Everything would be fine. But running low on wine was to a first century Jewish wedding party what an approaching tidal wave would be to a Carnival cruise ship. See, in first century Palestine, it was the sacred duty of the host family to provide refreshments for all of the guests for as long as the party lasted. At a minimum, running out of wine was humiliating for the host family. Guests might take offense. In fact, we know from scholarship that friendships had been broken from running out of wine at a wedding reception. Yeah, it got serious, didn't it? Roger Fredrickson, a scholar of this time, tells us that the host family might even be liable to a lawsuit if the wine ran out. And you thought tailgating was serious partying, didn't you? So wine was a big issue, wasn't it? If Martha Stewart were alive back then, one of the books she would have undoubtedly written was How Not to Run Out of Wine at Your Next Wedding. But that said, the most obvious problem was that when the wine ran out, the party could come to this uncomfortable, grinding halt. In our story, Mary, the mother of Jesus, got wind of this impending crisis. She took her son aside, quietly but forcefully. She said, "They have no wine." In other words, son, our dear friends are in trouble. For goodness sakes, Jesus, do something. Do something. Well, in the passage, Jesus' reply was at least curious. It was rather abrupt to his mother, wasn't it? Jesus said, "Woman, what concern is this for us? My time has not yet come." But Jesus reluctantly performed what the gospel writer refers to as his first miracle. This is what happened. 6 clay jars stood nearby, just like kind of what you would see there. That was the number of water jars required for the purification rite in an observant Jewish home. Each jar could hold 20 to 30 gallons, the size of a large garbage can today. Jesus asked the servants to fill the empty jars with water from the well. That equaled a total of 120 to 180 gallons of liquid. Jesus then instructed the servants to draw the water and take it to the master of ceremonies, the chief steward of the party. Now, when the chief steward tasted the wine, he discovered that not only was the wine problem solved, but this new batch was of such an extraordinary vintage that the hosts were congratulated for saving the best for last. And the miracle story ends with the gospel writer saying, Jesus did this, the first of his signs, in Cana of Galilee, and revealed his glory. So here's a question for you all. How in the world does turning water into wine reveal Jesus' glory? I mean, so what? He helped out some neighbors who were in a pinch. We get that, but this isn't like raising someone from the dead, is it? Is it just me, y'all, or does this miracle seem pretty irrelevant in the grand scheme of things? Yeah? Water in the wine, so what? So the question before us today is, what's the meaning of this miracle? Remember, if you take nothing else from this series about miracles, remember this. When we're studying the miracles of Jesus, the important question is never to ask, how did Jesus do the miracle? The important question to ask is what? Why did Jesus do them? What's the purpose here? And I think we can cobble together an answer to that question. But we have to do it by looking at 3 pretty curious details in this narrative. So, with a little bit of tongue-in-cheek, I'm going to give you 3 puzzling details, and together we're going to figure out why Jesus turned water into wine, why this is important, and what does it mean for us. So here's puzzling detail number 1, the conversation between Jesus and his mother. Remember that conversation? Mom turns to son and says, "They've got no wine." Which, if you hear the urgency in Mary's voice, could easily have meant do something. 2 words, do something. And I'll bet we could all agree, Mary wasn't the only one at that party a little nervous about the lack of wine, right? We can just imagine the partygoers. Maybe it starts in the corner of one of the rooms. The conversation starts in the wine's getting low. Yeah. Did you notice that? I sure did. They're running out of wine. Somebody better do something. A crisis was brewing. The host needed help. Spoken or unspoken, do something was likely on the lips of everybody at that party. Now, interestingly enough, do something was fast becoming the 2-word prayer uttered by faithful Jews of the day. You see, Israel was moving toward a national crisis, you all. The oppressive taxation of Rome was dividing the Jewish people. Some folks were advocating violent, bloody revolt. Others were advocating religious renewal. But most observant Jews of the day didn't want to side with the revolt people, didn't want to side with the religious renewal people. Most Jews of the day opted for something else. Instead, they waited, and they hoped, and they prayed prayed that God would save them by sending a Messiah to deliver them from Rome, to restore Israel to a free, holy, and powerful nation. Most of the people were waiting for the Messiah. So when Jesus turned water into wine, he made a statement to his mother, to the people at the party, and to an entire nation. All of them crying, "Do something." Jesus' symbolic reply was, "Friends, the waiting's over. God is about to do something." Well, here's puzzling detail number 2. It has to do with the wine itself. Now, in Jewish tradition, wine played a very important but symbolic role in announcing the coming of a new kingdom and in announcing the coming of a new king. For example, in the last chapter of the book of Amos in our Old Testament, the prophet symbolically describes a time in the future when God's kingdom shall reign. The prophet writes this. He said, "The mountains shall drip sweet wine, and the hills shall flow with wine." Now, similarly, in another important prophetic book in Jewish tradition, the book of Baruch, it says this, "The earth shall yield its fruit," meaning wine, 10,000. Each vine shall have 1,000 branches, each branch 10,000 clusters, each cluster 1,000 grapes, each grape 120 gallons of wine. This was another statement that wine was a symbol announcing a new kingdom and the coming of a new king. "Do something," said a nervous mother. "Do something," said an anxious and oppressed nation. So Jesus did something. He turned water into wine, symbolically announcing God is doing something. You see, a new king is coming. Can you see it? Here comes the Messiah. Well, let's jump out of the story for a second. Let's think for just a minute how this might apply to our life. If we're going to be honest with ourselves, friends, much of our prayer life to God could probably be boiled down to 2 words. Do something. Think about the circumstances that drive us to prayer. A friend is diagnosed with cancer. A superstorm trashes the east coast of the U.S. That new boss at work is driving you nuts. A crazed gunman opens fire in an elementary school. The marriage is deteriorating. Your daughter is dropping out of college. The doctor has bad news. The conflict with Israel and the Palestinians continues. All of these and so many others drive us to prayer, and behind those prayers, behind those concerns, is this urgent 2-word prayer to God. Do something. Do something. Maybe you're praying that prayer right now. Oh, Lord, please, please, please do something. But here's the good news of the gospel. In Jesus Christ, God already has done something. And it's something extraordinary. And it's something that can transform your life. It's a miracle. And what God has done in Jesus Christ has to do with the final puzzling detail in this miracle story. So here's puzzling detail number 3. Why did Jesus have those clay jars filled with water? You ever think about that? Jesus sure didn't need to do that, did he? I mean, unless I missed my guess, Jesus could have took empty clay jars, just kind of held his hand over them and filled them with wine, right? He didn't need to fill them with water first. But Jesus had the servants fill the jars with water so that whoever hears about this miracle could reflect on the relationship between water and wine. This is why wine is such an important element in this story. Water was the ingredient used in the purification rite of the Jews to make Jews ritually pure. So purifying oneself with water was the manner in which people took the initiative to renew their relationship with God, right? But wine was something altogether different. Wine was used at dinner parties, banquets, suppers, including one particular supper, right? At the Last Supper, Jesus had with his disciples, he took a cup, he filled it with wine, and he said, "This cup is the new covenant sealed in my blood." From then on, wine symbolized the blood of Jesus. And Jesus' shed blood points towards God's forgiveness of us. So, think of it this way. If you look up at the slide, water represents our human initiative to renew our relationship with God. Wine represents God's divine initiative to seal our relationship with God. So when Jesus turned water into wine, he was saying something very important to his mother, to that party, to observant Jews, to an entire nation, and to you and me and every one of us who has ever cried out to God, do something. Turning water into wine is Jesus' way of saying, I've done something. I've died for you. I've sealed this relationship between you and me in my blood forever. When Jesus turned water into wine, he was saying, guess what? Here's a new miracle. Nothing will ever be able to separate us. Nothing. Because our relationship has been sealed in my blood. That's the good news of the gospel. If we want to experience more miracles in our life, one of the things we can do is simply remember that nothing separates us from the love of God in Jesus Christ. Nothing. And then turn back to the Lord with arms held open, saying, Lord, I renew my relationship with you today, right now, because of your great love for me.